this business for 32 years, it's what was going on then and what is going on now are very, very different. Yep, hello? Yes, yes. He was not top of my list, actually. I mean, I was... Is Russ Heath still working? Yeah. Am I too close to the microphone, by the way? Shall I be back here a bit more? Is that right? He was not top of the list. I mean, I collected all the DC comics, and I had Sea Devils, which was one of the things he did at that time. It was Gil Kane for me, and then, you know, later in the 70s, Neil Adams was the huge thing. I mean, we all wanted to be like Neil Adams. You can list all those artists who really wanted to be Neil Adams. But yeah, Russ Heath was pretty good, wasn't he? Any other questions? Yeah. I don't know whether you can all hear his question, can you? Why did I switch to the computer? Well, you know, I said that I gradually liked less and less other people working on my artwork. As the computer crept into the world of comics, the color artist who was working on the computer was able to do more effects and coloring, sort of modeling on the drawing, and it became less and less like the drawing that the pencil or inker had provided, and more like something else. So it just had to be that I had to learn to do that kind of stuff. I'd never touched a computer in 1997 when I bought it, but Dave Gibbons, I'm sure you've probably heard of Dave Gibbons, he's another artist from Britain. He did Watchmen, I think. He's a real computer geek, and he loves all that stuff, and he's quite evangelical about the computer, and he introduced me to it, and I sort of knew I had to spend all that money and just dive in and try to understand it. You probably want to know why I prefer to do it that way now. As soon as I bought a computer, I bought the Wacom tablet and the pen. I'd never learned to use a mouse, and it became quite natural to use the Wacom tablet and the pen, just like you'd use a brush or any kind of pen to draw with. So it increasingly became very easy to... Okay, I started by drawing the pencils and inks like any other artist would do, scanning them in, colouring the thing in Photoshop. But when the line is on the screen, it's also very easy to... You sort of think, hang on, that arm is too short, or that, you know, head is too big. You can just change the ink line. It's completely malleable. You can do anything you like with it. And gradually, I just stopped using paper altogether. I stopped using, which is very annoying for artwork collectors like this gentleman here.
It's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy. And it's also not good for my bank balance either. But
another tragedy.
I still love to work straight on the Wacom tablet, the pad. It appears on the screen. If you don't like it, you can remove the last line you drew. You can move anything over you like. It seems like an obvious thing to do.
Why Jack of Fables, and would you do all the interior for an issue?
Well, oh, someone's on the phone. There are times in my career when I'm able to say, look, this is really what I want to do, and other times when I'm not particularly doing anything and I'm just waiting for the phone to ring. And Jack of Fables just happened to be... I'd worked with Shelley Roberg, or Shelley Bond now, at Vertigo over the various, you know, for a few years, and we got on together, and I wasn't particularly doing anything, and I was looking for a regular cover slot to do, and I was turning down a lot of things because they weren't something I particularly wanted to draw. And I thought, well, I can't keep turning everything down, so I thought I'd have a go at Jack of Fables. I'm not particularly... I do think that Tony Adkins is the interior artist, isn't he? I think he does a nice job, yeah, but I don't think I'd want to do an interior issue. I do you know, I do covers all the time, and I don't do very much interior stuff, but whenever I do, I think, gosh, this is really quite nice. You don't have some editor looking at every page, and, you know, when you do a cover, you've got to come up with an idea, you've got to do a rough of it, you've got to send it to the editor, and then you sit and wait, because the editor is you know, able to say, no, actually, I don't like that. But when you're doing the interior stuff, usually they don't come and tell you to redraw things. So I think possibly I ought to do more interior work. Any other questions?
When the 2000 AD started being reprinted under the Eagle imprint in the US, I was immediately blown away by the book, especially the first Judge Dredd issues.
Yeah.
The first 6 issues you did both the exterior and the interior, and after that you continued on as the cover artist for 30 issues or so.
Yeah.
And all gems. So what I wanted to know is, of those characters, which ones were favorite? I have a feeling I know what they are.
Which was my favourite in the...
Well, the 2000 AD series, Judge Dredd.
Yes, which was my favourite. Well, when I was working on 2000 AD, between 77 and 80, I guess, we did, how long were those stories? About 8 pages, 6 to 8 pages long each time. So we had a rotate, and they were weekly comics, so you had a rotating sort of roster of artists who would do each issue. Mike McMahon, who was the new kid on the block, whose work I love, we all thought Mike McMahon was the best Judge Dredd artist at the time. He was the innovator. He was the one who came up with the unique, unusual imagery. I was the kind of the straight man. I was the one who kind of sort of smoothed his fairly rough-edged style into an acceptable commercial, Americanized version of what we were doing, I thought. But it was often the case that the story that I loved the most was one that he'd drawn, or one of the other artists had drawn. So on the Eagle reprints, it was just great fun to just at least once do a character that I hadn't drawn the first time around. Like, I really like the League of Fatties. I don't want to offend any people who are, you know, but there were these very, very fat people. And in Judge Dredd's world, it was illegal to be fat. But there were sort of these clandestine fat clubs, and people would train, they'd eat masses of food, and they'd have contests to see who was the fattest, and they'd walk around with belly wheels. I always loved characters like that. There was a character called Judge Fish. It was a spoof on I, Claudius, which was in our country was a TV series. And I think in that story, Caesar, whoever he was Caligula, he made his horse his deputy. But in our story, he made a goldfish the deputy of, you know, the leader of Mega City 1 was Caligula, and his second in command was a fish. So all of these sorts of characters were great fun. What was the answer you were expecting?
For Judge Dredd, I thought it would probably be Judge Death.
Judge Death, yeah. Well, Judge Death was probably the hit villain, in a way. Not my favourite, but I thought he did end up looking quite good. So anyway.
Did you prefer Judge Dredd to the other stories that the Arc Witch?
Well, I think it was clear that Judge Dredd was going to be the hit character in the book, although when it started, the first issue didn't even have Judge Dredd in it. It was the second issue. But DR and Quinch were fantastic. That was another Alan Moore creation, wasn't it? And Alan Davis drew it. I love, because I did actually get to draw some covers on some of the Eagle reprints of those books. Any more? Oh, you, sir?
Yes, just curious. I inquired about Killing Joke pages, and some of them have been sold for over $10,000. I'm just wondering if you ever heard something along those lines. What goes through your mind?
Well, you know, obviously I wished it was me.